Arthur's Family Truth. My daughter Karen called from Indianapolis on Christmas Eve morning and said she'd been thinking about the home nurse. Did she take good care of me? Brian's wife had arranged her. Karen said Brian was paying $500, $800 a month. I nearly set my coffee mug down on nothing. Karen, I said, what nurse? No one has come to this house, not once. Before she could respond, I heard Brian's truck pull into the driveway. He didn't knock anymore. He walked in with that heavy stride of his work boots, tracking mud across the floor I'd mopped that morning. His wife, Diane, followed 3 steps behind, already scanning my living room the way she always did, a quick assessing look that moved across the furniture and the walls without settling on anything. Dad, Merry Christmas? Brian hugged me. He'd gotten thinner since summer, the kind of thin that comes from stress, not intention. Dark circles under his eyes that his haircut couldn't hide. Diane set a gift bag on the kitchen counter. She didn't hug me, didn't wish me anything. Pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Walter, that kitchen faucet is still dripping. She said it the way someone reports a code violation. Parts are on order. You've been saying that for 2 months she didn't look up? Brian, maybe we should start thinking about Clearview Gardens. They have availability. Very clean, very modern. This house isn't for sale, I said. I ran 28 years of wire through commercial buildings with my own hands. I raised 2 kids here. She shrugged. Just a thought. I had spent 2 days on Christmas dinner. A ham from the discount bin at Kroger, sell by date, was the next day. Boxed scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole. My wife Dorothy used to make everything from scratch, but Dorothy had been gone 4 years, and I'd learned to make do. The table was set for 4. Karen's flight from Indianapolis had been canceled that morning. Ice across I-70. She'd called, heartbroken, said she'd come in January. That conversation, her casual question about a home nurse, was still ringing in my ears while Brian carved the ham. Diane dominated dinner the way she always did. Their kitchen renovation, $78,000, quartz countertops, a restaurant-grade range, custom cabinetry. You should see the island, Walter. It seats 8. The designer flew in from Chicago. I nodded, pushed green beans around my plate. Thought about the $285 electric bill I'd been paying in installments. Brian ate quietly. When Diane stepped away to take a phone call, her voice dropping as she moved down the hallway, I looked at my son. Karen called this morning. He set down his fork. Yeah, she asked about a home nurse. Said you were paying $5,800 a month. Brian went still. Right. The nurse I arranged. Diane handles it. She found the agency, manages the payments. Janet is supposed to come 3 days a week. My chest tightened. Not the old angina. Something worse. Son, there is no nurse. There has never been a nurse. No one named Janet has ever set foot in this house. Brian stared at me. His jaw worked like he was chewing something that wouldn't break down. That's not possible. I've been paying $5,800 every month for 22 months. Diane sends me the invoices. I've seen the receipts. I take my own blood pressure every morning with a $30 monitor from Walgreens. I drive myself to Dr. Howell's office every 8 weeks. I pick up my own prescriptions. The only person who helps me is Dorothy Sims next door, and she does it because she's a good neighbor. The color left Brian's face in stages. 22 months, he whispered. 127,600, I said. 28 years as a union electrician, you learn to calculate fast. Diane's heels clicked in the hallway. She appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to her chest, smile fixed in place. Sorry, the HOA board. Emergency vote on pool landscaping. On Christmas Eve, Brian's voice had changed. She sat down and picked up her wine glass. I watched her read the room. Her eyes moved between us, quick, card player eyes. Everything okay? Tell me about Janet, Brian said. Something moved behind Diane's eyes, gone in an instant. Janet, your father's nurse? She's wonderful. I spoke with the agency just last week. Her voice was warm and practiced. What agency? Midwest Premier Home Care. Based here in Dayton, very reputable. Dad says no nurse has ever come to this house. Diane laughed, too bright for the room. Walter, honey, you're confused. Janet comes Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. She checks your blood pressure, manages your medications. I stood slowly and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept my daily log, a spiral notebook I'd started the week Dorothy passed. I brought it to the table and opened it to December. Tuesday, December 17th. Doctor appointment, 10 a.m., grocery run, watched Jeopardy! Wednesday, December 18th. Fixed the gutter over the garage, read 2 chapters, called Karen. I flipped back through months of pages. No nurse, not once, not a single entry. Diane's hand went to the diamond pendant at her throat. I hadn't seen it before this visit. You probably just forgot to write it down. At your age, at my age, I closed the notebook. I ran electrical systems across industrial facilities for 28 years without a single safety violation or documentation error. I don't forget to write things down. Brian had his phone out, scrolling. I'm looking at 22 months of charges. Midwest Premier Home Care, Dayton, $5,800 each. Show me the agency's phone number, I said. Diane stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her wine. It's Christmas Eve. Let's not ruin the evening over a misunderstanding. Sit down. Brian's voice carried something I'd never heard from my mild-mannered son. What's the phone number? I'll have to look it up. It's in my files at home. Google it. Right now. The silence stretched. Outside, a neighbor's Christmas lights blinked red and green through the kitchen window. The name might be slightly different, Diane said carefully. I might be mixing it up with another service. You gave me that name 30 seconds ago. Brian, you're being hostile in front of your father on Christmas. 127,603. Where is it, Diane? She grabbed her coat and purse. I don't have to sit here and be interrogated. When you're ready to be reasonable, call me. The front door slammed. Her SUV reversed out of my driveway and disappeared down the street. Brian sat motionless, staring at his phone. Son, go after her. But first, check every account, every receipt, every payment record she's ever shown you. We'll talk tomorrow. He looked at me with something breaking in his eyes. Dad, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Investigate. After Brian left, I locked the door. I wrapped the half-carved ham in foil, put it in the refrigerator, and washed the dishes by hand. Then I went to my home office, the spare bedroom I'd converted when I retired, and opened the bottom drawer where I kept financial records filed by month and year, going back 7 years. Document everything, assume nothing, habit from the trades. Bank statements confirmed exactly what I'd told Brian. Pension deposits of $2,344 to monthly. Social Security of $1,175. That was it. No incoming transfers from any agency. No reimbursements of any kind. I opened my laptop and searched for Midwest Premier Home Care, Dayton. Nothing, no state registration, no website, no Better Business Bureau listing. Every variation I tried came back empty. The agency didn't exist. I printed the search results, added them to a new folder, and labeled it Investigation. Christmas Day was quiet. Dorothy Sims brought over cookies around noon. I called Karen at 3 and told her everything. She was silent for a long time, then told me to stay put and let her work. 2 days later, she called back. Her voice was controlled in the way it gets when she's angry. Dad, I found it. There's a business entity called Heinz Senior Care LLC, registered in Ohio. Your name is listed as the care recipient, but Diane is the managing member and sole signatory. She opened it 19 months ago, using your name and your social security number. She must have pulled it from Brian's files. The LLC receives the monthly transfers from Brian's account and immediately moves the same amount to a separate account. The registered agent is Diane's brother, Paul Foster. Paul. I'd met him twice. New car, expensive watch. Diane always described him as successful in real estate. I wrote everything down. Dates, account numbers, names, connections. Drew lines between them on graph paper. The pattern looked like a wiring diagram, deliberate, designed so current could flow the wrong direction without anyone noticing. In January, I drove to the Legal Aid Society on 4th Street. Edward Crane was 59, a former county prosecutor. He studied my documents for 20 minutes without speaking. Mr. Hines, most clients bring me bank statements in anger. You've brought me a prosecutable case. He tapped the LLC registration. Fictitious business entity. Your identity, siphoning designated funds. That's criminal. I want both, I said. Criminal and civil. Criminal referral to the Montgomery County DA. Civil suit for fraud, identity theft, unjust enrichment. The SSN misuse gives us a federal angle if we need it. What does this cost? Legal aid covers my time. Filing fees, roughly $350. If we need a forensic accountant, that's where it gets expensive. I have $145 in savings. Crane looked at me steadily. No pity, just assessment. Pay me $120 as a retainer. I'll petition for fee waivers. And I know a forensic accountant who does pro bono work for working class cases. I wrote the check. My hand was steady. That night, Diane called my landline. The first time in 4 years. Walter, her voice was ice. I understand you're making accusations. This needs to stop. I pressed record on my phone. Ohio is a one-party consent state. I'd looked it up. You created a fake company using my name and social security number. That's a family financial vehicle. Brian approved everything. Brian didn't know the money wasn't reaching me. You showed him fake invoices from an agency that doesn't exist. Pause. Her breathing changed. You're old, Walter. I'm going to recommend a cognitive assessment. It's clear your memory is failing. My memory is fine, Diane. It's your story that keeps changing. She hung up. I emailed the recording to Crane with a timestamp. The following morning, Crane had already begun filing. Within days of learning about the legal action, Diane responded by filing for divorce. The house, both cars, half Brian's 401k, and full custody of Danny and Owen. She was using the boys as leverage. Karen flew to Dayton the following weekend. She sat at my kitchen table with her laptop and a legal pad. Dad. The total is worse than we thought. Tell me, $127,600 went to the LLC, but Diane also opened 3 credit cards in Brian's name without his knowledge. Combined balance, $71,500. She turned the laptop toward me. Brian had downloaded records from a shared account. Jewelry, $23,200. Country club initiation, $53,500 plus $600 on annual dues. Spa treatments at $1,950 per visit. A rental villa, $11,400 tours. Designer clothing totaling $25,400 $100 in irons in annual $400 religion. Slip. Transfers to Paul Foster described as consulting fees. $51,000. I pulled her social media before she deleted it. 2 years of photos, resort trips, rooftop restaurants, luxury hotels, designer bags and jewelry in every frame. She tagged the jewelry in one of them, Katchin. Blessed and grateful for everything life gives me. Life didn't give her anything. Brian's paycheck and my stolen identity did. March brought depositions. Crane filed the civil complaint, fraud, identity theft, unjust enrichment, conversion of designated funds alongside a criminal referral to Montgomery County DA Michelle Tate. Diane's first move was predictable, a counterclaim alleging I suffered from age-related cognitive decline and had fabricated evidence out of paranoid confusion. I drove to the VA Medical Center in Dayton the next morning and requested a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Dr. Priya Nair spent 2.5 hours on memory tests, reasoning assessments, pattern recognition, and executive function. Her conclusion, Mr. Hines, your cognitive function scores in the 91st percentile for your age group. No indication of dementia or memory impairment. Your logical reasoning is exceptional, 12 pages. I delivered them to Crane's office that afternoon. This dismantles their counterclaim, he said. Paul Foster was deposed in April. Under oath, he claimed the LLC was a legitimate family healthcare coordination entity. Crane asked him to name a single healthcare provider the LLC had ever paid. Paul couldn't name one. Asked him to produce a single invoice referencing actual medical care. Nothing. Then Crane showed him the bank records. Every dollar that entered the LLC account left within 72 hours. 60% to Diane's personal checking. 40% to Paul's business account. Mr. Foster, you received approximately $51,000 from this LLC over 19 months. For what services? Consulting. Of what? Silence. Paul requested a break. He returned 45 minutes later and invoked the Fifth Amendment. Crane turned to me after Paul left. Innocent people don't take the Fifth in civil depositions. Meanwhile, Brian's custody battle in Cincinnati was escalating. Diane had filed an emergency motion claiming Brian was emotionally unstable and a danger to their children. Brian called me on a Wednesday night. Danny asked me today why Mommy says I don't love them. She is using your sons the same way she used my identity. I said, as tools, you are their father. Trust the evaluator. Trust the evidence. In May, Arthur Mills, a retired IRS investigator who volunteered for working-class legal cases, delivered his forensic report, 44 pages. Total documented theft, 170,400 trabs. Not $1 toward my health care, not one. Diane's deposition came in late May. She arrived in a modest dress, minimal jewelry, coached and calm. She testified the LLC was a precautionary healthcare fund for my potential future medical emergencies. She said Brian had verbally approved it. She described the invoices she'd shown him as projections, forward estimates, not records of actual services rendered. Then Crane began cross-examination. You testified the LLC existed for Mr. Hines's potential future healthcare needs. Can you explain why the LLC transferred $23,220 to a jewelry retailer 3 days after receiving a $5,800 deposit? There may have been a bookkeeping error, 41 separate bookkeeping errors over 22 months, all moving money from a care fund to your personal accounts. She didn't answer. You described the invoices you showed Brian as projections, forward estimates of future care, but moments ago you testified that Janet was actively providing services on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Which is true projected future care or active current services? Pause. Her hand went to her throat. The pendant wasn't there today. I may have misspoken. You also testified that Paul Foster volunteered his administrative time to the LLC. Your bank records show $51,000 transferred to his business account over 19 months. Was he a volunteer or a paid consultant? He was, compensated for certain services. And you testified that Brian approved this arrangement. You've since acknowledged you handled it independently. Did Brian approve it or not? She contradicted herself 4 times in 30 minutes, said the money was for future care, then said it was for current services, said the invoices were projections, then defended them as documentation of active services, said Paul volunteered his time, then acknowledged he was compensated, said Brian had approved everything, then admitted she'd managed it without his knowledge. By the time Crane finished, Diane was gripping the arms of her chair hard enough to whiten her knuckles. June. Montgomery County Common Pleas Court. I wore my best work shirt, pressed clean, the only formal clothing I still owned that fit properly. Judge Howard Bell presided from the bench with the particular stillness of someone who had seen every variation of human dishonesty and was no longer surprised by any of it. Arthur Mills presented his forensic analysis on a courtroom projector. Every transaction mapped, every date confirmed. Every dollar traced from Brian's account to the fake LLC to Diane's personal spending. The first column, what entered the LLC account each month? 5,822 times. The second column, where it went within 72 hours. 60% to Diane's personal checking, 40% to Paul Foster's business account. The third column, what the money purchased. Not medications, not nursing visits, not a single aspirin, $23,200 jewelry, $53,500 country club initiation, $11,400 a villa rental, $31,200 spa treatments across 22 months, $25,400 designer clothing and accessories, $51,000 transferred to Paul Foster as consulting fees, $78,300 credit card charges on accounts opened in Brian's name without his knowledge. Mills walked through each line without editorial. The numbers did the work. I watched Diane's attorney take notes. I watched Diane watch the screen. Her hand moved to her throat once, reaching for the pendant that wasn't there. Pastor Gerald Moore from Grace Fellowship Church provided an affidavit confirming I'd received $200 monthly from the church benevolence fund for medication assistance since Dorothy passed. The church had verified my financial need through my bank statements directly. No family support, no trust fund, no care agency of any kind. Dr. Nair's cognitive assessment was entered into evidence. Diane's dementia counterclaim dissolved without argument. The numbers on the projector and the 12-page neuropsychological report made the same point from different directions. A man scoring in the 91st percentile for cognitive function does not misplace 22 months of nursing visits. Brian testified via video from Cincinnati. He was steady. He described each payment, the invoice Diane had forwarded, the agency name, the amount. He described how she had managed the arrangement from the beginning, how he had never spoken directly with the agency, how the invoices had always come through her. He described the moment in my kitchen on Christmas Eve when he understood what had happened. He did not look away from the camera once. Then Judge Bell addressed Diane directly. Mrs. Hines, can you produce a single piece of evidence that any money from this LLC was used for Walter Hines's medical care? Her attorney rose immediately. Your Honor, we'd request a brief. The question is to your client. Diane looked at her attorney. Her attorney looked at the table. No, Your Honor. Her voice had gone flat. Not at this time. Not at this time or not ever. The courtroom was quiet enough that I could hear the climate system running in the ceiling. Diane said nothing. The ruling arrived 3 weeks later. I drove to Crane's office on 4th Street and read it there, at the small table by his window. 27 pages. The court finds that the defendant engaged in systematic fraud, identity theft, and misappropriation of funds designated for the plaintiff's health care. The defendant created a fictitious business entity using the plaintiff's personal information, fabricated invoices from a non-existent care provider, and diverted $197,400 for personal enrichment. The defendant's testimony was not credible and was contradicted by documentary evidence at every material point. Judgment. Diane Hines must pay Walter Hines €197,400 in principal, plus $24,600 in accrued interest, plus $16,500 in court costs and expert fees. Total, $238,500. And the defamation counterclaim was dismissed with prejudice. She could never refile it. I set the pages down. My hands were not entirely steady. Not from weakness, from something else. The particular weight of something long resisted, finally coming to rest. What happens now? I asked. Now we collect, Crane said. The court froze Diane's accounts within days, $72,800 seized from checking and savings. A second order required liquidation of luxury assets. The jewelry appraised at $19,600 resale. The clothing and accessories brought $15,500 at consignment. The country club membership was forfeited entirely. Initiation fees are non-refundable, which meant $53,500 paid for access she no longer had. Each item cataloged. Each sale documented. I watched the inventory move through the process, the way I used to watch material lists clear at the end of a job, line by line, account by account, until the discrepancy closed. Paul Foster was charged separately by Michelle Tate's office with conspiracy to commit fraud and receiving stolen property. He pleaded no contest, returned $51,000, and received 3 years of probation. His real estate license was suspended pending review. The car he drove, it turned out, was leased. He couldn't make the payments once the transfers stopped. I noted that without comment. In Cincinnati, the custody evaluation report came back in Brian's favor. Dr. Ann Brock had documented a pattern of parental alienation, financial deception, and systematic prioritization of personal interest over the children's welfare. Brian was awarded primary custody. Diane received supervised visitation every other weekend. The prenuptial agreement Brian had insisted on 4 years ago, over Diane's stated objections, protected his pre-marriage assets entirely. The fraud judgment eliminated her claim to favorable divorce terms. She received $32,500 from joint savings. Brian kept the house, his retirement accounts, his company stock. The first recovery check arrived in July. $97,500. I held it at my kitchen table for a moment. Dorothy's photograph watched from the shelf above the stove. I could almost hear her practical voice. Don't just look at it. I drove to my credit union on Salem Avenue. The teller who had processed my $2,340 bought pension deposits for years looked at the check twice and called the branch manager. My balance, which had sat at $26.83 for the last 2 months of the legal battle, moved to $97,526.83 on 3. The manager confirmed the court seal and processed the deposit. Congratulations, Mr. Hines. It's not a windfall, I told her. It's accountability. First thing I did was pay the electric bill in full. Then the water bill 3 months behind. Then I drove to Dr. Howell's office and paid my outstanding balance of $765 in cash. Susan, his receptionist, who had let me make 20 billion monthly payments without ever charging a late fee, came around the counter and hugged me. The second check came in August, $79,000. The third and final payment arrived in September, $31,000. Total recovered, $27,500. Crane's fee, $62,300 net to me. $14,500, not the full $238,500 judgment. Diane's remaining balance would follow her as a legal debt with interest accruing annually, attached to her credit report, her employment background checks, her financial future for as long as it took. Some debts don't disappear, they wait. I spent 2 sessions with Ruth Caldwell, an estate planning attorney who worked with veterans and tradespeople. We created an irrevocable trust. The house, the education fund, everything structured so that no future claim, no creditor, no one could reach what belonged to my family. Mr. Hines, Ruth said, reviewing the final documents, this trust is legally ironclad. Your grandson's education is protected regardless of anything that follows. I signed each page with the same care I used to sign permit applications before a major job. Every signature a commitment, every document a line of defense. The entire net recovery, $105,200, went into the education trust for Danny and Owen. Every dollar. Invested conservatively, it would grow to approximately $325,000 by the time Danny was ready for college. Enough for both boys to attend wherever they chose with something left over. Brian called that evening. Dad, keep some of it. Your truck is falling apart. The roof needs work. I spent 28 years making sure electrical systems got power to the places that needed it, I said. That's the work. This money was supposed to reach the next generation. It still will. A silence. Mom would say you're being stubborn. Your mother would say I'm being exactly who she married. Brian brought the boys to Dayton in late July. First visit since everything happened. Danny burst out of the car before it stopped moving and ran across the lawn I'd finally had time to mow properly. He held up a lopsided clay bowl painted blue and red Ohio colors made at camp. He talked for 4 minutes without pausing about the firing process and whether a bowl that tilted slightly was still functional. Owen followed more slowly. 5 years old, still sorting through what the last several months had meant. When I knelt down and opened my arms, he came without hesitation. He pressed his face against my shoulder and held on without saying anything. I held on too. We spent 3 days together. Saturday at the Transportation Museum, where Danny cataloged every locomotive by year and Owen fell asleep in Brian's arms beside a retired freight car. Sunday morning, I took them out to the back deck with the binoculars I'd had since Dorothy was alive. You have to hold still, I told them. You have to wait. Danny spotted a cardinal in the oak tree at the edge of the yard. Red one. That's a boy. Male, I said. And the brown one beside him. He thought about it. His mate. Cardinals pair for life. They don't change. Brian watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand. When I caught his eye, he smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from my son in more than a year. Monday evening, after the boys were asleep in the spare bedroom, Dorothy's old sewing room, now fitted with bunk beds and a rocket ship nightlight, Brian and I sat on the back porch in the cooling dark. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much left that needed saying. After Brian's truck disappeared down the street, I stayed on the porch. The September air had the first edge of autumn in it, that particular sharpness that arrives in the Miami Valley before the trees turn, before anything is visibly different. But something has already shifted. The porch boards were new where the old ones had rotted. I'd done the work myself over 3 August weekends, each plank measured and cut and fitted. The satisfaction of hands doing something that needed doing. On the wicker table beside my chair sat Dorothy's photograph, our wedding day, 1981, her in her mother's dress and a smile that filled the whole frame. Beside it lay a letter from Danny, written in careful second-grade handwriting. Dear Grandpa, thank you for teaching me about birds. My favorite is the cardinal because they stay together forever. Love, Danny. I thought about the wiring diagram I'd drawn on graph paper in January. Names and account numbers and arrows showing where the current had been diverted. It was in Crane's files now, evidence in a closed case. I thought about Paul Foster somewhere in Columbus collecting rent checks for buildings he'd never owned. I thought about Diane in a studio apartment in East Charlotte, working reception at a dental office, whether she understood yet what she'd actually lost, whether she and Paul spoke anymore, or whether each of them had decided the other was the one who'd made the wrong call. Some things you don't get to know. I folded Danny's letter carefully and placed it inside Dorothy's photograph frame. Down the block, a child laughed. A dog answered. The last light of the day held along the tree line, that particular gold that takes its time leaving. I sat with it a while longer, not moving.